Tom from T-Bone Barbecue here, and today going to do up some briskets. Tomorrow's Easter, and I'm making 2 briskets for Kathy's family. We're going to go over to her uncle's house and celebrate Easter with everybody, and what better way to celebrate Easter than with brisket? Today I'm going to be cooking too, and I'm probably not going to film a lot outside because, well, it's raining out and I'm going to be miserable enough, so you guys don't have to share my misery. But I figured, why not take this opportunity and kind of show you around a brisket a little bit, for if those of you aren't familiar with brisket or are a little apprehensive about it. So let's get to it. Okay, so what we have here is a USDA Prime full packer brisket. A full packer brisket means that it has both the point and the flat. This is the point section. This is the big section. It's got a ton of fat on it. This is where we're going to get, in competition, this is where we get burn ends from. We're going to be making burn ends for everybody tomorrow. This is the flat. This is typically where you get your slices from. If you get corned beef in a deli, usually it comes from this part of the brisket. Corned beef, corning is the process. It's always corned beef brisket. That's a process where they, soak it in salt and spices and basically, well, more or less, pickle it or corn it and then cook it afterwards. Usually they boil it. Today, well, for beef brisket, we're going to smoke it. So this is, I think this brisket's about 16 pounds altogether. We're going to be trimming a lot of the fat off of the point. We'll clean up the flat a little bit. On the back side here, this is the fat cap side. There's usually a nice full fat cap on the back of each brisket. On the point side, we're definitely going to be taking a lot of this out so that we can get a nice crust, a nice bark, some good seasoning around the whole edges for our burn ends. On the flat side doesn't have nearly as much fat as the point does, so we'll probably take off a little bit of this and we'll leave a good probably quarter to an 1/8 inch layer of fat on the bottom of this to protect this meat so it doesn't dry out. The other thing we're going to do to protect the meat is we are going to inject it, and we'll go through that in a little bit. So let's get to trimming. Let me trim off this backside here. The other thing you want to do is, if you've got loose pieces like this, that's just going to dry out. So we're going to have to get rid of it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to keep I'm going to try to keep a lot of the scraps that aren't completely like fat, because what I'll do is I'll cube it up and then I'm going to run it through the food processor and grind it up, and then I can make meatballs or meatloaf or something like that, or just hamburgers with it. I hate to waste it. In most barbecue places, good barbecue places will always have a good sausage, and most of their sausage actually comes from the trimmings from their brisket and their pork, along with other spices. So we're going to hold that to the side because that'll be a good thing to grind up. And as you can see now, you can see some of this meat's exposed, and you can see that fat within the meat. That stuff, if we cook this right, will render into the meat and just make it juicy and flavorful. So I don't have the world's best knife skills, and in fact you'll probably see me cut towards me at some point, and that's probably not a great idea, but if I'm not paying attention, that's just something I do. As you can see, this is a pretty good brisket, actually. The flat end is a little thin, so I'm a little concerned about that. I might leave a little more fat than I usually do. I probably wouldn't cook this one for a contest because it's just a little too thin in the flat. I don't know how good my slices would come out. But for cooking for people at home, it's going to be great. People like brisket fat anyways, so. Now, I know I have some friends who, they love brisket but are kind of intimidated of cooking at home cooks, people who don't compete. And part of the reason it's intimidating is the cost. I mean, I got this at Restaurant Depot because I'm lucky enough to do that because we're both KCBS and CSA members. So I can get these at a pretty good price. These I think were like $3.60 a pound, something like that. So that's a pretty good price. But of course I had to buy, a pretty big piece. And some people just don't have the capacity to cook something like this. Some places will have what they call, they'll just have the flat. They'll label it as the flat cut or the first cut. That's probably a little more economical for most home cooks. The problem is that because they trim it off and they only sell it and they call it the first cut, they're charging like $5.50, $6 a pound for it, which is pretty ridiculous when it comes to a brisket. I mean, this is stuff that they used to give away for free, or they'd grind up for sausage at a butcher shop. So, sadly, this probably costs as much as just the like a 7-pound flat would. So, but if you only have the size for that, I guess that's what you'd have to go with. At some point, probably when it gets a little nicer out, I'll probably do a video where I'll show, how to do a brisket for the home cook. Some ways that you can get it accomplished if you don't have a lot of equipment and a giant smoker or two like I do. So that'll be coming. I'm going to take this off. You can see that's just thick fat. I mean, it'd be great to grind up in sausage, but not for what we want. So, just gonna basically clean that up. And I'm actually going to separate these. I like to cook them separate. They're two different muscles, the point and the flat. They're two separate muscles. A lot of times the flat will cook faster than the point anyways, so why risk drying out the flat just to get the point done when I can just separate it? I can do that in a competition. That is perfectly legal. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm also going to cook this hot and fast. I'm thinking, we're experimenting with doing hot and fast for a competition just so I can get more sleep. Because sleep at a barbecue contest is rare anyways, so I'll take what I can get. Yeah, see, you can see that's all hard white fat. That's not going to be good for anything, so that's probably just going to go in the garbage. I'll just discard that off to the side. You can see most of my attention right now is on the point, because I want to get that down. Then we'll focus on the flat. In fact, we'll probably separate it before I even touch the flat. But I am loving this point. This is probably going to render some pretty good burnt ends. Sometimes I'll get some slices out of there too off to the side. I've never been to Texas, but from my understanding, when you go to Texas and you order brisket, they'll ask you if you want lean or fatty. Lean comes from the flat, fatty comes from the point, but they don't do burnt ends. They'll give it to you as big, thick, they'll give it to you as slices. Good stuff. Burnt ends, I think, are more popular in the Kansas City area. We just got back from Kansas City. Had a great time. Met a lot of nice barbecue people. Made some new friends. Excited. We're going to try to get back to the Barbecue and Grillers Association contest next year, because that was a blast. That was our first steak association contest, and we did pretty well, so that's encouragement enough to go back. So anybody out there who's a better butcher than I is probably cringing watching me do this, but this is the way I do it. I'm going to take this stuff off the side here. It's a little dried out anyways, but it'll grind up nice. So what I'm going to do now is, there's a seam. I don't know how well I can show this on camera, but there's a seam that runs here, and this is where the point, this actually here is part of the point, and it comes down, and this is where the point attaches to the flat. So, excuse me, this is the flat, this is the point, this is where it attaches. So basically, I'm just going to run my knife right down through here, kind of follow that seam as much as I can to get these things separated. And at some point I'll just probably do a separation and then figure out what I got. So there we go. So there we go. So I'm going to set that off to the side right now, and let's focus on the point. Let me get these out of the way. As you notice, I keep a towel underneath my cutting board. There's two reasons for that. One, it helps keep the board from slipping. Well, there's a couple of reasons. Keep the board from slipping. Every once in a while, I can just wipe my knife off on it. Plus, I can put my trimmings on as a clean towel. Once I'm done bagging, I'll bag everything up and then just throw this right in the laundry. So. This is actually a bigger flat than I thought it would be. This stuff that's hanging off here, we're going to have to get rid of. But again, we'll grind it up. I'm going to just square this off. I'm going to take some of this stuff off the top. Some of the stuff that's really hanging off. The little silver skin and stuff I'm really not worried about. A lot of people fret over that and they'll trim it off. I'll leave it on because we're going to cook this for so long and it's going to dissolve. I'm only going to take the stuff that really has the fat hanging off of it like that. Key to that is a nice sharp boning knife. So you can see I can get under it, kind of fillet it out without putting huge divots into my brisket. Because you want a nice flat surface. You want to get rid of these big hunks of fat because rub will not adhere to fat. It'll adhere to the meat, but not the fat. Okay, so you probably get the point of what I'm doing here. So what I'm going to do is finish this up, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about injecting the brisket. Trimming up our brisket, we've got our point, our burn ends. I left some of the fat. I ended up leaving some of the fat on this because otherwise it would get really, really thin. And hey, there's nothing wrong with a little brisket fat. For competition, I'd probably try to get burn ends from here, from this area here, but we'll probably do a ton of them for for everybody. I'm always a picker, so. All right, this is our flat side. You get that kind of one thing I wanted before I'm done trimming here. One thing that I did want to point out was whenever you slice, well, any meat really, you always want to cut across the grain, not with the grain. If you cut with the grain, it's just going to be like shoe leather. It's going to be chewy. It's going to be terrible. You cut across the grain. You're cutting across all those meat fibers. You're basically cutting them all off. The meat fibers are what makes things chewy. So by cutting through them, you're basically breaking them, and it's a much better taste. So you can see here, lift it up. You can see here the grains are running like this. So we want to slice like this. But raw meat, it's easy to see where the grain is. When it's cooked, it becomes it's much more difficult. So what I like to do is basically mark my brisket. So what I'll do is I will cut this corner right off. Fortunately, we got to sacrifice a little bit of meat, but after it's cooked, it'll be very clear which way the grain is running, and I'll get my slices this way. If this was a competition, I'd probably trim this off and this off as well and make it a nice rectangle. That way I get nice even slices that fit in the box. The box is usually about 7 inches long, so something like that would fit in pretty well. But since we're cooking for family, I'm going to cook the whole thing, and then what I'll do is I'll probably cut it in half and do slices this way and get twice as much slices. Get a nice, and we're going to do 2 of them too, so, but we got like 30-something people and 30 hungry people, so the more the merrier. Plus it makes great sandwiches. So so now that we're done with that, what we're going to do is we're going to do an injection. Now I use these. This is, I think, 98 cents at Walmart. I just go in and I buy like a whole box at the beginning of the season. They're so cheap. They're, I consider them disposable because they're a pain in the butt to clean. I mean, I do have some fancier injectors, and if I have to inject a lot of meat, I'll do that, but hey, an injection is optional. It's just kind of an insurance policy just to make sure things stay moist, especially in the flat area. So Basically, you get your little injector, your syringe, you put that there, you take off the little guard, nice sharp injector. And what we're injecting with today is I'm just using beef broth. Just great value Walmart beef broth. We just want to enhance the beefy flavor and keep it moist. In competition, we use something a lot more fancy, with phosphates and all kinds of other stuff and unnatural stuff in it. But again, in a competition, you're cooking for one bite. People that are eating, family tomorrow, they're going to be taking, 3 or 4 slices of briskets, a couple burnt ends, and then a bunch of other stuff and sides like that. If you eat something that's that heavily, injected with all kinds of enhancements and stuff like that, it'll taste great at first, but after a while, you're going to feel awful. And also, that stuff tends to give you the wind, something fierce, and quite frankly, 30 people getting brisket farts at the same time would not be a pleasant experience for anybody. So we're just going to fill up our syringe. And then what we're going to do is we're going to inject. Now, I like to inject with the grain. If you go on the internet and read, should I inject with the grain, should I inject against the grain? It's a 2-hour argument. I go with the grain. It basically just follows the pattern of meat. You can go across it. That's fine. Some people talk about staining. I've never really experienced that. So what we're going to do is basically go about every inch in a checkerboard pattern. The way you inject, you don't want to just jam a bunch of injection in. You want to go lightly and then pull back as you're doing it. And some will always leak out. It's just an inevitability. So basically I just go in like a checkerboard pattern. And again, you're going to get it shot back at you. You're going to get it all over the place, but that's part of the fun. So the hardest part of injecting that I've always found is every time I have to reload the syringe, I have to remember where I was before I reloaded. So we'll just come back and do the next one. It's never going to all stay in there. It's probably a good idea to do this in a pan rather than on the cutting board. Do it in a pan, that way the juices that run out get collected in the pan, and if you run short on injection, you can just tip the pan and fill the injector back up. But fortunately, I didn't think that far ahead. I'll do that on the next one. In fact, I think I'm going to get John, my oldest son, who's hanging out with me today, to inject the other one. But he's a little camera shy, so I'll just be taking pictures of him. Those will probably go up on him and his brother, our Silver City Barbecue Boys. That'll be up on their website. As you can see, I'm making a mess, but that's okay. I'm not going to go too heavy with this, too. Again, like I said, it's just an insurance policy. And to give it a little bit of a beefier flavor. Now, you could put, some spices and stuff like that, some salt, some garlic, into your injection. The problem that I find is, if you do that, if you use these injectors, the needle head isn't really that big on it. And if you put spices in there, they could get clogged. And there's nothing worse than a clogged injector. You're sitting there and fight, and then they'll just shoot right back in your face. So I'm going to finish off injecting this, and then I'm going to inject the point too, give that a little bit of beefiness, and then we'll talk about seasoning. Okay, so our brisket's now all injected. What we're going to do now is we're going to season it. Before I season it, though, I'm just going to try to dry off the top of this brisket a little bit, because the rub will not adhere to a wet surface. And as you can see, I've got this now in a pan on a rack. This is actually how I'm going to cook it. It's not as popular a method. The reason that I do it this way is sheer laziness. The last thing I want to do at the end of the day, or every time I cook, is clean out a bunch of grease and stuff out of my cooker. By doing this, all I have to do is clean this rack and toss this pan. Plus, it keeps all of my drippings as well. So if I need to, if I want to put that when I wrap it, I can. If you know, if I want to save that to the side and heat it up and dip them in at the end, you know, I've got all those great beef drippings. You know, I'm not going to make gravy out of it, but it's a nice thing to hold on to. So what we're going to do is we're going to season. Now I'm going to do 2 seasonings here. First one I'm going to use is Boar's Night Out White Lightning with double garlic butter. This stuff is awesome. Thanks to Lisa at Old World Spices barbecue spot. She hooked us up with this when we were out in Kansas City. We actually used this on our ribeye steaks, and along with the other rub I'm going to show you in a second. And we took 9th place in our first SEA. Just unbelievable. This stuff is great on anything. It says it's for beef, pork, chicken, veggies, and fish, but you know what would be great on? Popcorn. It'd be great on a shoe. I mean, it's just awesome. So what we're going to do is we're going to try it on brisket today. I've never used it on brisket before, but today's the day. So we're going to give it a nice liberal coating. Again, a nice even coating. You know, this is mainly salt, sugar, and garlic, so stuff that complements beef really well. So we're going to do that, and again, we're just going to give it a nice pat, and we're going to let this sweat in. I'm just going to get the sides here just a little bit, just so that person that gets that first bite off of the slice will be in for a treat. Oh, this stuff smells awesome. Oh, you can smell the butter. We're going to do it on the point as well. Now, the flat, I'm just going to season on the top side, because on the back, all we have is, we have that fat cap, and it's just going to be a waste if I put this on that. But I am going to do the back side of the point. You can see this stuff's already starting to soak in. It's going to give it a nice flavor. So let me just get this. I'm not going to do it as tightly on that. I don't want to move this around too much because it's got all that injection sitting in it, and I don't want that to lose. Okay, so this is the second rub that we used. It's called Three Little Pigs Texas Beet Rub. Again, barbecue spot will hook you up with that stuff. Lisa hooked us up with it out there. This gives it a nice, a great color. It gives it that nice mahogany color. It gives it a nice, really enhances beef very well. It's a little spicy, a little sweet, a little spicy, and it's just delicious. This I would only use on beef, though, most likely, if I can get it open. Special thanks to TSA for not confiscating this on our flight home. We did have 3 rubs that we brought home with us. These 2 made it. The third one didn't, but c'est la vie. That third rub we actually did use. Damned if I can remember the name of it right now. If Kathy does, she'll probably update our website for it. But we used that. We didn't use that on the steak. We actually put that in with the butter that we melted, that we basted the steaks with. That rub, again, it was a beef rub. I found it to be a little bit sweeter than this, so I thought putting it in the butter would really give it a nice. Yeah, that's good. Just flip it over, give a little to the back. Again, there's a lot of fat still back here, and that's not going to adhere to it, but it'd be nice to get some on that. That's the thing. The intent for me was to get all the fat off of the point to, get burnt ends with crust on both sides, but I'd much rather leave some fat on there and get a nice thick burnt end than have something that, looks like a bottle cap and it'll dry out. So you work with what you got. Okay, so these are all seasoned. They're going to sit out for probably about an hour. I'm going to go light the cooker and get these things going. Like I said, I will not be bringing you with that outside with me today because it is rainy and miserable out here. But